everybody. It's so wonderful to see you for our annual event tonight. Before I hand over to Yvonne Weldon from the Metropolitan Aboriginal Land Council, I just want to make a point about closed captions. If you want subtitles with this event, there should be a little balloon popping up at the bottom right now that you can click to get closed captions. On that note, Yvonne, thank you for being here, and I'm really excited to hand over for you for the Welcome to Country.
Thank you. Hello, sisters and brothers. As was said, my name is Yvonne Weldon. I am a Wiradjuri woman from Shire here in New South Wales. I'm from the waters of the Clare, also known as the Lachlan, and of the Murrumbidgee rivers. I am the elected chairperson of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, who are the cultural authority under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act for the land that I am on. I would like to pay my respects to all elders past and present, to all First Nations, to you and the ancestors' lands that you are on. The boundaries of our traditional owners are not defined by man-made lines, but through the natural landscapes of the earth. The Eora Nation's country covers the Hawkesbury River in the north, the Nepean in the west, and the Georges River in the south. My people have practiced our traditions for thousands of years and endless generations. One tradition that is shared in various forms across Australia is a welcome to country. It is more than just words, it is a spiritual process by honouring the ancestors' footsteps we are all walking in, continuing the practice of the many generations before us to the many generations to come. My people have been a part of this land for more than 60,000 years. We are the oldest living culture of the world. And on behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, the elders and the members, I welcome everyone to the land of the Gadigal. I acknowledge the Gadigal people and the people of the lands that you are on, whose spirits and ancestors will always remain with these lands, our Mother Earth. The First Nations of this country are the most resilient, unique and sustainable people on the planet. For our people to survive for as long as we have, it's been through a continual practice of respect, a collaboration, understanding and a willingness to come together. As we're all joined online, and to give respect and honour, could you all please pause for a moment to remember the many sacrifices that have been made along the way, the ones we will continue to make, and the ones we shouldn't have to. The challenges that we are faced today is not the same as it was only a few months ago, or even a few years ago. Yet this has become an accepted norm. It brings a disadvantage that flows on from one generation to the next. The cycle doesn't only change because of policy or legislation. The battles for the endurance of adversity is the greatest evidence that needs to be included into all of our aspects of life. And it should not just be gathered through a research-only process, because it cannot only be about data and bottom line. Our lived experience must be included as well. Human life or people's opportunity, or lack thereof, cannot be rationalised to balance what will never be equal. So as you connect, learn and share tonight, tomorrow and beyond, know that everyone's health and well-being and our support of each other is more important than the material things in this world. There are so many factors that can impact on our health, such as our history can affect our future. So no matter what walks of life we all come from, we all need to support each other, bringing out hidden heartaches to share and bringing us all as strength together. The road travelled alone is the longest, hardest road there is. I can join you and you can join me. The greatest gift you can ever give someone is your time. For so many of you supporting people with their journeys, you often take on, whether it's a role or a requirement, it stays long with you afterwards. So you all have an important role in so many people's lives. This should be recognised. You are recognised, and I thank you. So with this time of this pandemic, don't let the social distance make us socially absent. We must maintain physical distancing, not creating barriers to our social connections. So whether it's through your work, your family, or your networks, creating an inclusion, an acceptance, and a resilience. All of us together can bring about positive changes to multiple generations. We are in this together. This month it was the deferred time or week of NAIDOC, with the theme always was, always will be. So whether you think about the land, the history, the devastating impacts of past and current times, our culture, or the resilience of my people, Know that the answers to the questions for everyone in this country should always commence with the voice of Aboriginal people first, because we are the first people of this country. So with that said, let us all draw upon my people's spirits as we continue on our journey. May my people's spirits walk with you and guide you as we strive forward for us all. Again, on behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, welcome to Gadigal land. This always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, and it was wonderful that you could be here again with us tonight. Maintain physical distance, but don't lose that social connection. That's definitely something, an important piece of wisdom that we'll be carrying with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
On that note, I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on. At the moment, I'm in the office of the Sydney Policy Lab at the University of Sydney, and that's on Gadigal land. So I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Really briefly, it's important to acknowledge that this land was always a place of sharing knowledge, co-creating knowledge, passing on wisdom long before these buildings were built here. And this was and will always be Aboriginal land. So on that note, we're so excited to have you all here. We're so excited to get into tonight's program. We know that Zoom fatigue is real. So myself and the entire lab team that's on this call here is really grateful and very excited to see you all here, to see that you've made this choice to be here with each other and be here with these incredible leaders from King's Cross in Sydney to the Kimberleys in WA, and of course, Hilary Cottam in UK. Such an exciting program. We're going to get into it super quick, but before we do, 3 key things I want to briefly run through. First, who are we? Second, what are we actually going to do tonight? And third, how are we going to do that? So first, who we are. I'm not going to do a long spiel because hopefully most of you will know us. The info is all on the internet. You can email us after, and there's many more important people to hear from. But very shortly, because I can see some new faces, just so you know, we are at the University of Sydney, a new centre, and we work with the brilliant minds here on campus, as well as off campus, community groups, policymakers, campaigners, media, private sector, philanthropy, to fuse together deep wisdom from everyday practice and experience and academic knowledge, so that we can build coalitions and winning strategies to build change for the common good. So that's who we are. What are we going to do? There should be a slide on your screen. This is the agenda. 5 key parts. First, you'll have a quick speed date. You'll get a chance to know each other. Have a chance to get to know each other. Then we will hear from Hilary Cottam on the big change we need and what it might look like. Then we'll hear stories and examples from Social Reinvestment WA and a team of Olabud together and the Wayside Chapel here in Sydney. Then again, we'll hear from Hilary. How do we do that? Amazing stories we've heard. What makes it work? And then lastly, lots of participation, thoughts, conversations, questions. And on that note, I'm getting to the how of how today will run. Quite a bit of participation, stories, exciting personal experiences. We would like to ask you to be present with us and remove distractions. Make sure you're muted, but if your internet connection can handle it, maybe turn your video on so we can be together, and rename yourself so that we know who you are. So just put your name. There's a button you can click and you can make sure that we can see your name, maybe your organization if you feel like you want to identify that way. Now, as I said, lots of participation. If you don't feel like interacting, if you're actually, you're doing some other things or internet isn't stable, totally fine. Don't leave. In fact, really stay with us. So don't leave. You can participate and interact as much as you like. So if you don't feel like participating in the breakouts, you will automatically go into a breakout room and you'll automatically come back. You won't have to do anything. Just keep your camera switched off. Keep yourself on mute. Take this space is yours as well, so feel free to be in it whichever way you want. Big of a tech issue. We'll solve it for later. Moving on, Marc. Why are we here today?
Well, may we ask, why are we here today, Lisa, for this? Can everyone hear me? So it's wonderful to be here. I'm Marc Stears. I'm the director of the Sydney Policy Lab. I do apologize for tech problems. We always said that participating online is harder than participating in real life, but we are going to give it a go anyway. I am so happy to say that we have got some fabulous speakers today, all of whom are tackling really a single central question. And that is, how can we have the big change that we need to tackle climate change, economic inequality, social exclusion and alienation, at the same time as making us all feel as if we are part of that change, that we can participate in it, that we can build it ourselves, that we're not just being governed by the rich and the powerful, but that we're getting a chance to drive things from our own communities and from our own neighborhoods. So big change, which we can all be part of. That's the question that we're posing today. And really, I haven't read anything which has answered that question as well as Hilary Cottam's fabulous book, Radical Help, which many of you will know and have pored over yourselves. But also, I haven't seen it done as well, as we're going to hear from the examples from Australia after Hilary has a chance to talk. So the great opportunity we have tonight is to hear from one of the world's best thinkers on this question of what change do we need, and how can we all be part of building it, and then to look at some very real life examples of what's happening here in Australia. And then, tech permitting, to have a chance to chew over that together collectively, ask questions, pose challenges. So with that said, what we're going to do, format-wise, is we'll hear from Hilary. She'll have a chance to say a little bit about her work and her thinking on the big change that we need. I might then pose a question or two to Hilary, and then we're going to hear from our Australian experts, the people who are building change on the ground. Then we'll hear again from Hilary, getting some more reflections on what we need all to do in the future, and then, as I say, a chance to participate ourselves. So with no further ado, you haven't come here to listen to me or to Lisa, but you've come here to listen to Hilary Cottam. I'm going to introduce Hilary and ask her to kick us off for the evening. Hilary.
Oh, thank you, Marc. Well, I'm really thrilled, a bit nervous now after what you said, but I'm very thrilled to be with you in Sydney. And it is incredible that this pandemic, as terrible as it is, enables us to kind of connect across oceans in this way. And I don't know if Yvonne is still with us, but thank you, Yvonne, for that opening, which I found so incredibly moving. And I think your idea that support is about so much more than material things and how we walk together goes right to the heart of what I want to say, and to the ways that we need to kind of change to move forward together. So thank you very much for that. So I want to open this evening. I mean, I'm so excited to be with my fellow panelists and to have the opportunity to open, to talk about why we need the change. So when Marc says, how do we have the big change and how can we be part of it? I think the first thing is to have a shared story of why we need that change. And so I believe, and I want to suggest, that our current systems, whether they're financial, social, political, ecological, are actually beyond reform, and that we're in a moment of paradigm change. And I don't use that word lightly. And I think that there are three reasons why we're at this moment and we need a different story about why we need to change. And the first is that we face huge problems, demographic problems of aging, migration, of course, the ecological catastrophe that is kind of hurtling towards us if we don't do something, deep-seated crises of mental health, chronic conditions, and so on. And what I always say is it's not just that these problems weren't foreseen when the social systems that we have, which were largely designed in the post-war era, came into being. It's that the nature of these problems is very different. So if we think about a problem like chronic condition or the challenges of aging or climate change, these aren't the kind of problems that can be solved in this sort of mass industrial way, which was to have a leader who would kind of have an idea, make a policy, and then command change, and we would all do what was commanded. To make change now, we need millions of actions by millions of people all moving in a similar direction. And that requires extremely different social systems. Am I visible? I just got up some very weird message about my camera. Am I? Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. But to make that change, we just need all to kind of work in a different way, which means we need very different systems that kind of embrace us and allow us to take part rather than hold us at arm's length like our current systems do. The second thing is, of course, that we're all working in this profoundly different context. I think the most important thing is the technology revolution we're living through, which is changing how we sleep, how we parent, how we work, how we travel, every single aspect of our lives. And this deep-seated social change, I think, is really kind of visible in our families when we think about social systems, that our welfare systems are all designed around this idea of a kind of nuclear family, in Britain a white nuclear family, where the man would go out to work and the woman would take care of children, parents, neighbours if necessary. And actually it's really notable that when the welfare systems that we designed in the UK and then exported all around the world, in that moment, Beveridge, the architect, had huge conversations about what to do about care and really couldn't resolve the problem. So he swept it under the front door and said, okay, well, women will do the care. Which kind of broke down in 1960 or thereabouts. And since then, we've had this huge challenge about how we think about caring for one another, how we can think about that beyond a service and how we can integrate that with the rest of our lives. And then there's something else, I think, related to that context, which I just want to touch on, which is that there is a kind of post-war mindset that operates, and I'm sure you've all seen it in action. And that mindset, what it does is it thinks that we live in a sort of stable world, and every now and again we have a problem, we might lose our job or something happens in our family, and then some sort of service will appear and kind of correct our path and let us carry on this stable norm. But actually our lives today aren't like that. What happens is that we live this continual pattern of change, and that's going to continue. I mean, before the pandemic, I'm currently working on work, and I was doing workshops all across the UK, and the first thing I did, just to ask people to kind of feel comfortable in the room, was to draw for me their lives. And every single person drew this sort of up and down line, whether they were a university professor, a cleaner, a carer. So we have to think in a completely different way about how we design around continual change and the fluid moment. And that requires a very different mindset. And then thirdly, the reason that we need to think again is poverty. Because poverty actually hasn't gone away. It's with us, it's taking new form. Technology in particular is driving these enormous economic and spatial inequalities. It's deepening. And I think something that's really important is that poverty today is about money, but it's just as much about relationships. And what we're seeing increasingly through social research, often with huge panel data, is that it's who you know that's going to affect what the course of your life. It's who you know that's going to affect what kind of work you get, who will take care of you, how well you can access healthcare systems, what kind of old age you'll have. And yet the policy lenses and the welfare lenses that we've inherited from the last industrial revolution are very technocratic and simply unable to see relationships, let alone work with them. So that's an enormous challenge. So when I talk about paradigm change, it's because I think that together these changes are so deep, so profound and wide-reaching that they're actually altering the logic that governs our societies. So this gives rise to new types of organisation, new forms of capitalism, new cultural dreams. We're seeing this really profound reordering of what we can do, what we think is common sense, and what we see is desirable, which Yvonne referred to at the opening of this evening, and what we think is necessary. So in that context then, let's think really briefly about what 21st century systems could look like. So in Radical Help, I tell this story of a 10-year experiment to answer exactly this question. So working with communities, with the local state, local organisations, we set out to design a set of responses. I don't want to call them services because I always say service last. What can we do that kind of integrates in society before we need a service? And how can we take care of people cradle to grave? To support flourishing family lives rather than the present set arrangements that steps in to punish once things have gone wrong. New ways of supporting adolescents, which is kind of a category that didn't even exist when our welfare systems were designed. I mean, not that the age groups didn't exist, but we didn't label it and think about it that way. How can we think about health, about work, and then how to live well in the final stages of our lives? And one of my favourite experiments in the book is the work experiment. And as I mentioned, I'm currently working on work again. I've taken up those themes. And we know that globally, 8 out of 10 jobs aren't advertised. So we know that now in this century, the best way to find work and to progress in work is to know people. But of course, we also know that those who most need a broad set of social connections to do this, what sociologists call bridging connections, so relationships with people that aren't like us, which is what's most important now, is that these relationships are abundant amongst those who already have resources, but often not there for the people who most need them, people who are out of work or perhaps marginalised in some way. So looking at the expense and failure of current services, which operate, I would think we can visualise them like a 1950s production line. So you line up the job seeker, you get their CV done, you give them personal advice and support with applications. It's a factory approach, and then you try to kind of slot them into a job. We asked instead, what would happen if we got people together, we asked them what they dream of, and then connect each person to the next person who could help them along that step of their journey towards that dream. So I can't obviously tell you the full story this evening of what happened, but we developed a new service that we called Backer. And Backer was about relationships. It was about bringing together people who are in work, out of work, and in between work to share the richest resource they have, which was themselves, their connections and their relationships. It's not a jobs club. It's about connecting others to develop your path and capabilities through finding and progressing in work. And a randomized control trial on our first 2,000 members showed that our service was about 3 times more effective at a fraction of the cost of other approaches. And that included those who were furthest from the labour market, what the UK welfare system calls the permafrost. So it's not surprising that our connections to one another work in this way and make us strong and support us to change, because we know this in our personal lives. But the question is how we can include this more widely when we think about social systems. And I think a lot of my work is actually about inversions, about simply kind of turning things on their head, asking what they look like and what we can do from there. And for me, this is the core inversion, which is in the 21st century, we need to stop these attempts to fix people once they've gone wrong. We have to move from what would be a needs-based approach to one rooted in capability. And the capability approach, which as many of you know was developed by the Nobel Prize-winning economist Amartya Sen and the philosopher Martha Nussbaum, asks this deceptively simple question, which is, what can I really be or do? But this question about what I can be or do actually contains multitudes. It's about the concrete reality outside our doors. Do I live in a place with parks where my children can play, in a place where there actually is good and decent work that I can get to? It's about our feelings, about how we've been told who we are and what we might be able to do, whether that's constraining or positive. And most importantly, I think it's about power. It's about understanding the systems that we're in, who's designed those systems, and who is doing that telling us what we can do and what we should aspire to. So it brings into focus sort of the external concrete, as I say, and internal feelings. And I think it's also important that the idea of a capability can't be done to you. It's a developmental approach. It's not like a sticking plaster of need where I give you something or I pass you something. It's saying, what support do you need to grow the capabilities that you need to flourish in this century? And in my work, I focus on 4 capabilities: on good health, on learning and work, on community, on the ability to be part actively of a community, both kind of locally and at a planetary level, given ecological challenges, and on relationships. And through the work itself, what we've learned is that the most important thing is relationships. I liken it to a game of Jenga, which is that you can take out other parts and things more or less stay standing. But when you take out relationships and our connections to one another, then things begin to fall apart. So I could say a lot more about this, and I hope we're going to dig into what exactly does a relational response look and feel and act like. But I just want to conclude this part of this evening, the part of the opening section, to go back up a level and say, so if we think in this way about capability and relationships, what does it mean for our system? And to go back to Marc's opening, if we're thinking about how we can move forward together, what is the kind of collective vision that we should work on? So I think to move forward, we need to be able to do 3 things kind of in our lives and in our systems. We have to be able to operate with the same principles across both of those. And the first is that we have to be able to tell a new story. We've got to tell a story about what flourishing means in this century, which isn't a story about materiality, as Yvonne was saying, although it's important, of course, that we have that basis. It's not a story about services or public service reform, but it's a bigger creation story about what could be, what we could grow into, what kind of lives do we want to lead, and we have to kind of create that new narrative together. The second thing is that we have to enable transition. We have to understand that this really is a moment of paradigm change. So in the short term, we have to support our communities through the shocks that are going to come. They're inevitable from this pandemic is going to create all kinds of global economic shocks in its wake. But as I say, behind that, of course, and something you felt very strongly really already, is kind of the looming ecological catastrophe, climate change. So we're going to have to develop new forms of support very fast that can protect fragile places on the one hand, but in particular support us to move from one form of living and working, which is extractive, to another which is about remaking, regenerative, and that can live within the boundaries of the planet. And then the third is that we need to address the deeper legacies. So our inherited systems actually weren't universal, however much they said that they were. And they treated often everybody the same, which actually wasn't to treat everybody equally. So part of the new is actually addressing the deep structural legacies of injustice, whether they're spatial, racial, or social, that are still there and have all been holding us back for centuries, and that we now need to really acknowledge and address in order to move forward. So I think the really important thing is that the new is actually all around us. It's growing there in the eddies and the fissures and the ruins of our broken 20th century systems. And I think that most of you here this evening, I've already seen names come up of people that I know, and there's those of you I've read about, that here this evening, you're doing the work of growing that new. So that's partly why it's so exciting to be here. But our challenge then is to think about how we bring all that new together and how we ensure that we get resource behind it, and that new becomes the system that will support us all in the century to come.
That's amazing, Hilary. Thank you so much for the incredibly powerful opening. And I just think that reflection that you ended there with is such an important theme for our discussions this evening, which is that, you know, the old systems, the big clunky mechanical, someone at the top pulling a lever to try and fix problems, doing so, as you say, in this undifferentiated and often uncaring way, it is still with us. But at the same time, springing up all around is this new fluid, relational, connected system where people look, as you say, for strengths rather than deficits, for the possibilities of collaboration rather than for the possibilities of control. And I think one of the things that you've done so powerfully already in the reflections is just show, you know, that it's that theme of the new is being born all around us, but it has to grow sometimes in terrain which is uncomfortable for it or not well suited to it, because it's not that the old has passed away and the new is right here, that the two at the moment in some sense are living side by side. And I think that's a theme that we really want to kind of take up for the rest of our discussions. And actually, I think, Lisa, it's a good moment to bring in the practical examples from Australia so that we can see something that Hilary has just been talking about these new initiatives and enterprises going on right now, even in a context that might not always be as conducive to them as we might hope. So, Lisa, do you want to introduce our second set of speakers?
Yeah, absolutely, Marc. And thank you so much for that, Hilary. Also, I can see some amazing comments and really thoughtful reflections come through in the chat. So feel free to keep that coming. We will have lots of time for questions at the end. So as Marc just said, it's now time to introduce some incredible leaders from here in Australia who are trying to shift the dial this way. First, we'll hear from Malcolm Edwards, the president of the Shire of Halls Creek, Dean Mosquito from Olabud Together, and Sophie Stewart, the campaign coordinator at Social Reinvestment WA. They'll be talking about the work that they're doing, and it's incredibly inspirational. I hope you'll all really enjoy it. Also, we've got an exclusive on a new video, a new film that they have just created. So, you know, lucky you. After that, we'll hear from John Owen, CEO and pastor at the Wayside Chapel here in Sydney in King's Cross. So Sophie, Malcolm, and Dean, I hope you're ready. We'll start with the video. It's queued up, I hope it's queued up. And after that, the floor is yours.
This job at Olabud, it's very peaceful. The crime rate is very good, it's very low. No more breaking, no more stealing.
I heard what they was doing, and I was thinking, oh, that's something like I should do, yeah. I would love doing. Yeah. So it's going pretty good so far. I'm loving it so far. Yeah.
There was so many crimes in Halls Creek, and the police didn't have the answer for it. They wanted to know how we could help reduce the crime rates here in Halls Creek. So we came together and said we'll start up an elders reference group.
Wow, we got a good bunch of blokes, and we all, we all get along really well, and we're a good team to work with.
Well, the night patrol is a bit like try and be out there for the kids, like, and really try to get them home earlier, especially like school week, like someone where they can go to at night, when they can't go home or having problem at home, at least we out there for them,
And we have to go and talk to the parents as well. Like now we've got a program for following up in the morning with the kids. We didn't have that before, and we decided to change that.
We help the girls. Yeah, the girls. Yeah, because some girls here go through stuff. So we just ask them if they're okay or if they need anything. Or help at school, we can come to school and sit down with them.
They all grow up healthy, happy people, and want to participate and give back to their community. Yeah.
Nothing is too hard if you all get together and do what we've been doing here.
Thank you. Pass over to Malcolm.
Okay. My name's Malcolm Edwards. I'm the Shire President of Halls Creek. It's a council that has an Indigenous, there's five of there's a council of seven, five of them are Indigenous, so Indigenous majority. One of our focuses is on job creation. 74% of our population is Indigenous. So we're trying to get, to get people off welfare. We're talking local jobs, Indigenous jobs. There's quite a considerable amount of money that the government has put into our road system. There's a rare earth mine out of Browns Range, so there's quite a bit of road construction, also the Tanamar Road. So we decided to start up our own road crew, and we've got 10 Indigenous people actually present working out on the Gordon Downs Road. And this has also established a training program. So over the next 3 years, we've got 60 people that were trained in Cert 3 Civil. This will give them opportunities for jobs. The Shire will take some of them on, but it gives them an opportunity to go to through the main roads, through mining companies and other contractors. So we've also got a dozen positions for school leavers, kids leaving school. We offer a traineeship at the Shire. And after that, they're sort of job ready. We've had we did consultation with 11 communities, and I attended a leadership meeting some time ago, and they came to us, these people that were from all the communities, and they were very disappointed, disillusioned that none of the government departments or some of the Indigenous organisations, nothing was happening. They could see that the Shire was actually starting to achieve something. We were making some changes, and you'll hear also the Dean's working in the in the reduction of juvenile crime. And they could see all these things happening. And so they said, we want to work with you. We want the Shire to help us. We want you to help us go forward, to find a way forward. And so we're starting to develop trust and respect from these communities. And that's absolutely important in the way forward. And working together is the way to go. How do you do?
And I can see a question just came through about where Halls Creek is. We're calling into you right now from Perth in Western Australia, which is 4 hours flight from most of you in Sydney. Halls Creek is in the remote part of the East Kimberley. So you fly 3.5 hours from Perth up to Kununurra, and then you drive 4 hours south. It's near the border with the Northern Territory in Western Australia. It's one of the most remote areas and remote shires in the whole country.
Yeah, hello, my name is Mosquito. I'm a guide in Jarrow tribe from Halls Creek, and I work for the Olabud, night crew engagement officer. And like, the first thing I want to say, like, the way they put me in charge of the night crew is identify what kids on the street, at night, and then employ family members that belong to them, them kids, And that's why we worked at it. And because of the COVID came around, we had to work overtime and still keep kids off the street because of the COVID. And I want to tell you one story for one young fellow named Jamal, 15 or 16. 18 months ago, he was like breaking and stealing, and couple of months ago, he came up and asked us for a job. And next year, he coming down to Perth, schooling way, boarding school. And especially like for local people, we get more connection than anybody else with our own mob, like we can deal with our way, And plus, like, everyone know each other, like tribal side, cultural side, But everyone connected,
Thanks. Thanks, Dean. My name's Sophie Stewart, and I'm the campaign coordinator for Social Reinvestment WA. So we've been a key partner supporting the Shire of Halls Creek and Olabud together, and Dean, and the work they do in leading this really significant change on the ground, because it is transformative in the way that this whole entire initiative is working, and it's flipping the way government tries to work on its head as well. So in WA, we lock up Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people at the most disproportionate rates in the entire nation. We're spending close to $1 billion a year on corrective services, and our current justice system is frankly just punitive. It reacts to crime after it's happened, rather than responding to those underlying causes of offending, which we know are overwhelmingly socioeconomic, the issues of poverty, inequality, health that our communities are facing. In fact, Boxar backs up some data on this, and that they did a study. It found that a 10% increase in household income caused an 18% reduction in property crime and a 14% reduction in violent crime in a community. Just that 10% increase in household income. An increase in police at the same amount only achieved results of less than 1% impact on crime. So by comparison, we can really see that increasing the socioeconomic standing of a household and a community makes the largest difference. Social Reinvestment WA, we're a coalition of 28 nonprofits, and we've been working together for the past 5 years to end the overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in our justice system. And the only way to do it is, number one, to work together. It's the only way we've been able to get a platform across the state. It's the only way we've been able to lend support to Halls Creek as a community, is having that powerful collective voice. And number two, it's actually having the effective alternative vision, because what we're doing right now and the status quo does not work. So what does that approach look like? Well, number one, at that system level, we need law reform. So getting rid of outdated, discriminative, illogical policies like fine default reform, which we repealed in June of this year, and justice reinvestment, so redirecting our resources to early intervention and prevention as opposed to just reacting and putting all that money into the tertiary end of the justice system. But even that stuff is still just pulling the levers at the top-down approach. So what we really need is that transformative bottom-up level approach, and that's the change that's happening in Olabud Together and in Halls Creek. We need the data-driven, evidence-based coordinated responses, so government to share information so we can identify vulnerable communities, but it's really about place-based community-led decision-making being at the centre of how we respond to crime and offending in communities and how we build safer communities for every single person involved, because communities at their heart are the experts on their realities. They can decipher the causes. So data and evidence can tell us about what issues are happening, but it's a community member like Dean who can tell you why that kid is on the street at night. And it's also that our communities are the ones who can tell us if those issues are what's even important. Maybe the government thinks that youth crime is the issue, but actually in that community it's about food sustainability and that kids are hungry at night. And if you solve that, it'll solve the crime issue. We also know that communities that are empowered and leading change are the most sustainable forms of change. So if you build the capacity of leaders on the ground, local leaders on the ground to lead change, and you listen to their solutions, you've set up leaders for life. Like people like Dean and the Olabud Together leaders who led the practical responses in Halls Creek to COVID-19 when it happened. That's not their job, it's not their normal job, but the capacity of these local leaders was already there to do that. We also need to prioritise cultural, social and emotional wellbeing and ensure that our systems are accountable and anti-racist. Lastly, I guess I would say for individuals, because there's a whole lot of collective individuals here right now, we need to change the way we talk and think about crime. Stop talking about being tough on crime and let's start getting effective at responding to the root causes of offending. That's the only way that we'll create safer communities, and it has to be done with communities. It means changing the way that government resources and funds. Instead of government putting out tenders, communities coming up with idea and that money being shared. And we need to listen to the stories of people in the justice system. You know, we've got a podcast, Stories from the Inside, but it's only through building empathy and standing in another person's shoes that we can begin to address together the most pressing issues in our justice system. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Malcolm, Dean and Sophie. It's such an incredible pleasure to have you here, and thanks for letting us all watch that incredible film too before you're officially launching it. Amazing. So right now we have one more incredible leader, CEO and pastor of Wayside Chapel, John Owen, who will speak with you, and then we'll hear a bit more from Hilary before we get to ask questions and share reflections. The chat is incredibly busy. Keep it coming. Keep thinking, keep reflecting. We can work that all out in the last bit of this session. For now, we're going to go to John Owen. Again, we'll play a video first. As soon as that video is finished, John, the floor is yours. So here we go.
I've been on the street since I was very young, and I have been a friend and a client of Wayside for many years. These days, just still trying to get ahead in life, being happy at the moment. It enables people who never really got a chance to blend in with the community and become a part of the community. It's like a stepping stone. There's better social interaction and energy, and Wayside has played a big part in that.
Someone that has never slept rough before, you wouldn't want to do it. It is the most scariest thing that could ever happen. I did it since I was 5 years old, and I stayed awake all night, protecting myself as a woman. Please, go and get help. Don't try and be a tough guy. There are people out there who do care about you and who will help you.
My footsteps are imprinted between the main street of King's Cross and the Wayside Chapel. So every day I was granted to come here and have food, shower, support, encouragement, and help of any kind that was possible to achieve. The Wayside Chapel is a God-given gift, as simple as that.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Hey everyone, it's good to be, it's an honour to be able to share with you all tonight. I'll just be a few minutes talking a bit about the Wayside Chapel and our approach and how it relates to the material that Hilary has presented about a year ago. Lee Cooper presented us with that book and we all read it, we all devoured it, and we really felt a resonance and a harmony. And we really feel that the work that we've been doing over the last decade or so is putting it into practice. As well as my other roles, I am also a qualified social worker. So it's qualified for me to tell you the best and the scariest joke that I can, which is, what is the 10 scariest words in the English language? And the answer to that is, I'm a social worker and I'm here to help, right? You don't all laugh out loud at once. It's not that funny. It's more scary because it's so true, right? See, the whole concept of how we've gone about talking about social work and how we've kind of designed it, which goes off Beveridge's welfare state, is a strange little beast. And it has developed and morphed a few, but sadly it is so mired in a system that is outdated that it is it's more harmful than helpful, I would argue. You know, because most people would turn up to the course having done some good, maybe having a conversation down at the local school gate and found out that a friend's going through an issue, and they've maybe made a few phone calls and worked out that they're pretty good at that, and they think, well, maybe I should, over a cup of tea with that friend, have helped solve a few pressing issues that person might be having. And then all of a sudden you go, and your first day of course is your lecturer will tell you everything you just did is wrong because you broke all the boundaries in doing that. And so it kind of creates this kind of double bind for us. And, you know, I think that along the way we, in a desperate attempt to be seen as a hard science, we kind of sold our soul a little bit to the system, and our services reflect and reinforce the very issues that we intended to get involved with. So, you know, and what is that issue? And I think Hilary named it very well, is, you know, when I went on honeymoon, we ended up not going to a nice place in Hawaii. We ended up going to Calcutta and volunteered together at the Mother Teresa's home for the dying, and then the orphanage in the afternoon. And that was a pretty brutal and full-on confronting experience. But it was through that time that, you know, you kind of really have your eyes open up to the realities of what people, yeah, there we go. Of what's going on in this world. And I do recall that at one point in our time there, I picked up one of Mother Teresa's books, and it was full of her speeches, and she would often come and out to Australia and the UK and America, and she would proudly stand up and say, look, the West needs me far more than the lepers of Calcutta. And it kind of hits you right in the face. But she would also say that loneliness is the leprosy of the West. You know, when we're talking about poverty and disadvantage, poverty isn't just about a lack of cash. It's a lack of connection. It's a lack of having the right people in your corner who can help you see that life can be any different. So, and, you know, the whole system we've set up, unfortunately, reinforces all that isolation. You know, you walk into somewhere, usually on the worst day of your life, seeking support, and you're presented with a pill, a program, or a pamphlet, and you walk out feeling just as isolated and just as lonely as when you walked in the door. So at the heart of it all, that system is a lack of community and connection. So, you know, one of the key things we say at Wayside is no one is a problem to be solved, they're a person to be met. And our whole mission is around creating community. You know, words create our worlds, right? And so we don't use the word of client, we don't use those story, that kind of language, because a client means I'm an expert, and it means that there's a distance between us. So we have everyone who walks into our doors, we call a visitor, which kind of makes us a host, but it creates a different kind of connection around which we can meet You know, we do run around all day helping people into housing and into rehabs and into detoxes, but there's a huge difference between meeting a person to solve a problem or solving a problem in order to meet a person. And if we're doing the former, I don't see that much efficacy or outcome or change there. But if we're doing the latter, we can see that there's a great opportunity to create a connection. And also words, where we define people by their problems, we narrow them down as well. And, you know, we find is where there's a community and a connection is I'm so much more than my problems. I think the problem that we've experienced through lockdown is we've all kind of bought into the myth of the perfectibility of the individual. You know, when so we're all feeling more depressed, we're feeling more anxious. You know, we're watching our favorite Instagram influencers show you the 5 easy steps to abs. And, you know, and we're comparing ourselves and we're not measuring up. When actually perfection is around connection for me. You know, if I have the right people in my life, I don't need to be perfect. You know, in a community setting, we have gifts. I have contributions to make. You have contributions to make. Where I'm weak, you are strong. And I think we need to rediscover those values and that connection and the changes it can make. You know, we say that if someone walks away feeling met rather than being worked on, it's a good day for us. And what we see is when people first walk in through our doors, they're utterly convinced that what they're experiencing is completely unique in the warp and woof of human history. And slowly, we don't try and convince them that it's not, but slowly we wait for that moment where someone comes to life and they realize that there are people with them and for them and who are walking alongside them. And we see that people suddenly move towards life and health on their own 2 feet. You know, we had a young lady who we don't call anyone a prostitute, we call them working girls. And she walked in one day and said, "What do you got to do to be different?" Lisa, what are you doing there? You going? And she said, "What do you got to do to change the world? And what do you got to do to get a job around here?" We said, "You got to believe the world can be a better place." So she did. And she, so we put her on the front desk, and because she'd worked in massage parlors, all of a sudden the messages on the slips were matching the phone numbers, which is a complete break in Wayside history. And she just got better and better. And we helped her put a CV together and realized that the word customer relations covered a multitude of evils. And all of a sudden she got a job working in a local legal firm as a legal secretary. The point of that story is no one ever told her at any point that what she was doing was wrong. It's just she became a part of a community and she saw the contribution she could make into that space. You know, we regularly encourage people to jump the counter. And that kind of makes all the difference. We've got a new employment and training program called the Wingspan Project that takes young people who the system would call at risk, but we see them at promise. And we surround them with a community of care and connection, as well as training and resources. If someone wants to come and mentor them, we get the kids now to interview them and say, "What can you contribute into this space?" We don't just want you for your expertise. We don't just want you for that narrow. We want to know who you are as a person. So there is, you know, such a power in making the power connect and reconnect together. So that's really kind of been, is that my time? Is my time up?
That's your time. That's why I'm doing the rigid dance.
So look, we just thank you for that chance to share, but also Hilary, you know, this is the stuff that really makes our heart beat as well. The system's broken. We need to unbreak it.
Thank you so much, John. That's a really powerful note to end on. The system's broken. We need to unbreak it. There'll definitely be more time to hear from John. I'm going to hand over to Marc now, who's going to bring back Hilary, and then we'll bring back all of you later. So feel free to keep the questions coming. Marc, take it away.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I mean, look, it's just amazing to hear the stories from WA and from Sydney and to see the change that is happening. And everybody has made that so powerful today. I guess the question that I've got in my head, and just to set up Hilary's next talk to us, is like, how do we get more of this? You know, how do we make it happen? All those who feel this so deeply in our hearts, you know, what should we be doing day in, day out? And can politicians come to the rescue? Are business people going to be involved? What do charities look like? What are the big NGOs doing? Like, if you're with us on this journey and you want to build a more relational answer to the challenges that we face, what should we all be doing? And again, no one better than Hilary Cottam to help us get our heads around that. So I'm going to hand back on to Hilary now. We'll hear a little bit from Hilary, then we'll all have the chance to ask some questions of all of the folks who've joined us tonight.
Well, thank you, Marc. I mean, and thank you all of us together, and John. It's just kind of wonderful to sort of almost be able to kind of touch what you're doing. And yes, it's so, there's just, I would like to kind of respond and ask you questions. I know I'm meant to be doing something else, but I think it's so interesting. I mean, I think that both of you, you know, have really talked about connection. So, and really sort of standing in the shoes of others and kind of working in a different way. But then, of course, the challenge is the kind of headwinds of the dominant system, which is what Marc is alluding to, because I think all of us who do this work, we know it's like sort of constantly rolling a rock up the hill against something else, against a kind of dominant way of thinking and being and doing. So I just want to make a few remarks really in the spirit of opening the conversation up and thinking about that, about how we get the change we need. And I think firstly, we have to work in a different way. I mean, for about 3 decades, pinned over my desk, I've had the words of the inspirational African-American feminist Audre Lorde, who says the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And I think kind of, Sophie, you talked about this, because I love the way that you're working on the legal side, as well as kind of Dean is, you know, in there in everyday lives and bringing those two sides together and knowing that, you know, that the legal side is one thing, but that's not enough. And how do we kind of really grapple with this? And also we have kind of, I'm sure there are many Aboriginal sayings, you know, the whole idea of, you know, you can't make new wine in old bottles. We know that we really have to kind of do different work. And as many of you know, I use a design process as part of this. And one of my former collaborators, Chris Van Stone, who is now at Taxi Australian resident. Chris, I think you're in your garden. I'm feeling kind of really, I can see you feeling rather jealous, is here on this call. And I think that that there's a lot I could say about this process, but one thing is that I think that visual approaches offer something very particular, because you know, it's very hard to talk about issues that are shameful, and most issues of welfare are, and it's very, very hard, I think, to admit that we need help. Like, all of us need help at certain stages of our life, but as somebody beautifully said in one of your films, in that moment where you need help, it's very, very difficult to ask for it, to believe that somebody's going to be there to help you. So I think working in ways that aren't based on kind of formal interviews, you know, often I ask people if they can step outside their institutions, because I think lots of people do community work, focus groups, but what they do is they go with a kind of flipboard from their organization and say, how can I improve my service? Which is something completely different to what we've heard this evening from all of us together and John, about actually forget the service, I'm in the community, what do you need now? What is the next thing that I can do to support you on your journey? I think that design has an affinity with technology, which is critical for the redesign of the system itself, for thinking about business models, for thinking about how money and other resources flow. It offers us radically new possibilities. I haven't been able to follow everything on the chat, but early on I saw somebody say, but isn't this old? And I think absolutely this is old. Like, most of this stuff has been around for centuries, certainly since the 1970s. The question is now how we design systems around it, and technology can really support us to do that. I'm not talking about apps. I'm talking about how we kind of re-gear systems, turn things on their head and move what is a real resource in a different way, and move different connections forward, which I discuss in Radical Help. And then for me, design is a form of Esperanto, because I think what is critical about this work is bringing different voices and experiences to the table, which again is something we've seen in the Wayside Chapel and all of us together. So what we need are professionals from very different disciplines. We need the lived experience of people and communities, and we need to find a way, we need a process that hears these voices on a level, that doesn't just kind of have some powerful policy voice and then ask a community person to make a comment. We have to have a way not to, you know, very often what we hear is not what we want to hear. It's a kind of bump in the narrative that makes it difficult to make a policy, and then the tendency is to iron that out, which then means that later on the policy doesn't work. So we need a process that allows all those things to be heard, where we don't kind of smooth out the bumps in the narrative. And I mean, I think also what's really important is that it's not the process itself, it's whose hands the process is in. I mean, McKinsey could use my process, but they would use it with very different intent to very different ends. So this is about the vision that I talked about earlier. What's the vision framing the process and the work? And for that, we need new forms of leadership. I mean, I've already talked about the challenges of any form of command and control of 20th century leadership. the leaders we need today understand the economy of cooperation. They're horizontalists in the way I think we just saw in All of Us Together. They're bringing support in different ways towards a common goal, aligning energy in movements, communities with the power of politics, the power of the law, and we need everyone. So Marc has asked me, you know, how do different people come together? And as you know, Marc, I'm really interested in the history of technology revolutions and their symbiosis with social change, because every time we see new technology and new technology paradigm, we do see new social systems forming. That is inevitable. The question is how we're going to shape those new social systems and for who. And I think in every previous technology revolution, we've seen the importance of basically 4 sets of actors. And I think we need to kind of think about that again. So the first is organised civil society, which includes organised labour. This is where the energy is, this is where the ideas are, this is where the creativity is. But as we've seen at the moment, alone it's not enough. It can do a lot, but it's kind of hasn't got the resource. It's moving into the headwinds rather than having those headwinds behind them. Organic intellectuals. And I say organic intellectuals in the Gramscian sense because I'm not just interested in intellectuals in universities, although you are very important, but it's who has got brilliant, rigorous thinking and can tell stories about that, that connects over the heads of institutions to people's lives and can help build that vision, because we all need to act, but kind of in one direction. So that's back to the story, back to the ideas. The third group, I think, that we've often overlooked in this revolution, and they're what I call the new industrialists. So if we look historically, we see that in every revolution, every technology revolution, there are leaders of business who dare to challenge their peers and say that this isn't working, that the way we treat our workers isn't working, the kind of conditions of labour, the way we connect to society, our role and purpose isn't right. I mean, Henry Ford classically was the case. It's not that he was a nice person, but he saw that the form of capitalism he was in would not actually even help his business to grow, and he needed to think differently about how workers were paid. They needed to, you know, frankly, they needed to be able to afford his car, so he had to think differently. So I'm also interested in where are those business leaders today who can think differently, can challenge their peers, and talk about why a new social settlement is needed, not just for society, but to move the economy forward in a different way. And then fourthly, we have the state. And in my narrative, I think the state is perhaps the most important actor, because the state is the head gardener. They have to set out the pattern, they have to set out the design code, if you like, and that facilitates others. You know, you mark out the vegetable patch, you mark out the flower patch, you have to do a bit of weeding. It's definitely the case that some things have to be weeded out. But then having done that, everybody can come in and begin to create and to grow and develop together. And I think that's what's really important. So my work now really is on what are those fundamentals in the design code that we can all use. What we can't have is a blueprint. We can't say, as we did in the 20th century, that this is the pattern, everybody must do that. We know that that won't work. But what we can say is that these are the critical components, capabilities, our relationships with one another, our a sort of idea of who we are as humans and how very many aspects of that humanity are important and need to develop. And then we can think about how, with that core design code, it can be made and remade in different ways in the communities where All of Us Together are, you know, on the, was it called the King's Road, King's Cross Road, John, kind of, you know, where you're working Wayside Together, where I'm working in communities here in the UK, that we take that code, it's not the same everywhere, but we reinterpret it for our communities, putting that culture of care, connection and humanity at the heart. Well, Marc, I'm going to hand back to you because before I go on too much.
No, that's just wonderful, Hilary. Thank you so much. I mean, I've just been looking at the chat, and Lisa and I are going to try and pose some questions that are coming from the floor as well, as we go through for the next 20 minutes or so to you and to the other panelists. But before I start that, one theme which has come across very powerfully in the chat so far, which is also, as you know, fortunately a theme which I get obsessed with, so it's an opportunity for me to ask a question I was going to ask anyway, is what do you do with those people who are committed to the old system and who don't see or won't allow themselves to see the benefits of the new? So when you're confronted by, you know, I don't know, the CEO of a council or a state government here in Australia, or the vice chancellor of a university, a theoretical university, not ours, fortunately, or a captain of industry, and you're trying to make the case that you've made so powerfully tonight and in your work, but they just won't see it because they're still stuck in that 1950s, 1940s top-down lever-pulling view. What's your advice for those folks who find themselves in that situation? Do you ignore them? Do you work around them? Do you try and persuade them? Or are there a multiplicity of different approaches?
Well, I think that there are a lot of things. I mean, I would say broadly that, I mean, I don't know, you, Marc, you might say your context is different, but it's kind of a third in whether you're within an organization or within a nation or a community. There's a third who are like, yes, I have been doing this all the time anyway, thank goodness I'm going to join you, this is fantastic. There's a third that are like on the fence thinking, well, I'm not so sure, but once they see that the dynamism is in that direction, they go in that direction. And then there's another third who are the naysayers. And I think I can only speak personally, but I think I've wasted a lot of my life trying to convince those naysayers. And I realize now that actually that you just have to ignore that third, really. I mean, of course, that's really unfortunate if you are in that university with that chancellor, or that council leader or whatever. But I think that we have to be realistic that we need to build momentum right now, and that's not where the momentum is going to be built. So the thing is, if you're an individual, is to get yourself into a team or a place where there is already that momentum and you can build with it. So I mean, just quickly, I mean, I really like the work of Lulu and his book Reinventing Organizations. And one of the things I write about in Radical Help is that he likens the work to being like a penguin, and that many of us have tried to do this work in the wrong institution, and you feel like a penguin on the land, you're ungainly, you can't really move, you can't get anything done. And then he says, when you're in the right team, you're like a penguin in the water, you can swim. So I think if you're here this evening and you are the penguin, then you need to get yourself somewhere where you can swim under a great leader who kind of makes things happen, and you can be part of that team. But the other thing that I think is really important is actually practice. So I think, that the ability to touch and feel and visit and kind of actually viscerally experience, an evening with Wayside Chapel or kind of out there with all of us together is really important. And I can definitely tell lots of stories where work I've been doing is very, very fragile. In fact, one of the kind of most sort of successful systemic projects I've done was at one moment very, very fragile. And it sort of had built great momentum, it was falling apart. And then the Deputy Mayor of New York arrived and said, I want to see your work. And we went to this place and this kind of where we were working. And everybody heard that the Deputy Mayor of New York was coming. So suddenly all the local leaders came because like, wow, they're kind of here on our patch in the kind of northeast of England. And then suddenly momentum built. So sometimes outsiders, that kind of yeast can also be important to kind of, just shine a light on what's happening in all of us together. And then people in your chat were saying, hey, like, where is all of us together? This is really amazing work. So it's a multiplicity, but I don't want to kind of ignore what you're saying because it can be very, very difficult. But that's why what you're doing at the lab and this evening is so important, because it builds momentum and brings those of us who are in one direction together, I think.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that penguin metaphor is just brilliant. I mean, I remember once I'd spent sort of 20 years teaching at Oxford, and then I went to work for a very technocratic think tank, and then I ended up in the Labour Party. And a very good friend of mine just said, why do you keep working in these institutions, which are so committed to the sort of old way of doing things when you're so passionate about the new way of doing things? And,
it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, like I'm a sort of insider outsider. So I've also spent years at the World Bank trying to kind of because those old systems have got all the resource locked in them, which we need to get out for the kind of things we're talking about this evening. So we have to kind of play that dual role, but then we have to get back out and be with our kind of fellow spirits in order to kind of recharge, relearn. I mean, we're constantly learning and kind of swim off again, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. So this is, we're going to move into a Q&A bit just because the chat is so full and people have so many questions and comments and thoughts and reflections. And we were going to do it in breakout groups, but the tech has defeated us. So we're not quite there with the new industrial revolution quite yet, but we're on our way. But we do have the brilliant Lisa Fennis, who has been looking through questions and sort of sending people messages and mails. So Lisa, do you want to call on a couple of folks to ask questions to Hilary and the panel?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Marc, and thanks everybody for keeping those comments coming. A quick note: we definitely can't keep up with everything, but please rest assured, we're saving it all. We're putting it all in a nice blog post, and the video will be in it, so you'll get to read it back. And don't worry, it'll be fine. For now, for these last parts of this event that we've got together, first I'm going to call on Kellyanne Kircher to ask a question. Then a fascinating question from Mel Poole about confrontation with power. So we're going to ask Mel to really tightly pose that question in the plenary. And then another question from Natalie Williams about what her advice is for bureaucrats in her position. So just going to take those three and hand them back to Hilary in the panel, and then we'll do the next round. So Kellyanne, you're up first.
Yes, thank you. I'll try to be as succinct as possible. I wonder what it looks like to deprofessionalize caring. And I hear in so many of our stories tonight, even though we talk about not doing services, that all roads still seem to lead back to, in fact, more services and different types of services and different leadership of services. So I'd love to sort of hear some inspiration about where are settings where we have fully given back people's capacity to care for each other, be it in illness and grief. Where is that happening, and what can we learn from that?
Lisa, do you want me to respond?
So much, we'll collect the other two first, and then you can do them all in one go. So Mel Poole, your question about confrontation with power, can you ask that in the plenary?
Thank you, yes. Hilary, I was saying that I feel like we're kind of skirting around what an actual confrontation with the powerful interests that are embedded in the status quo looks like. And, you know, I guess I'm thinking of both the non-profit interests and the for-profit interests, but as an example, I'd love to hear how you would wrangle a company like Serco, because it feels like in some of this conversation, we're almost assuming that there's a desire to, like there's an intention to care or to help or to make these systems work. And I guess I don't think that that intention is necessarily there. I think it's actually in conflict with the interests of a lot of these actors. But yes, I'd love to hear what you would do with Serco.
Thanks so much, Mel. Then Natalie Williams, if you're still here, your question on advice for bureaucrats in your position. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that. Natalie, are you still here? Maybe she has left. Well, I'm just going to read out her question, Hilary, and do it for Natalie, and she can listen back to it. Her question was, what is Hilary's advice for bureaucrats in my position attempting to reform, design, and commission new family support systems? So what if you are in an agency and you're really keen to see change and drive change and it's hard? What do you do then? So three quite different questions. Over to you.
Oh my goodness, Lisa, how long do I have? These are such great questions.
Good luck.
Okay, so the first thing is, and also they're different, so I actually do need to kind of sort of think about all of them. I mean, Kellyanne, I really like your question about care. I mean, I think, you know, the great gain, which we're still actually fighting to keep, of the last industrial revolution was the weekend. The idea that you could have a paid weekend and not work was like, when, you know, when the revolution started, people would have thought you're smoking crack. And I think the great gain of this revolution has to be a reintegration of care into everyday life. Like, we have to rethink the boundaries between work and care. We have to kind of rethink this idea of factory care, which really, you know, is sort of this idea that it is just a service. It's done by kind of other people on the clock, which is, I just want to say, also extremely damaging to people who are carers. Like, we have amazing professional carers, and in the UK we have an incredible turnover of our care staff because they are amazing professionals and they don't want to work within these kinds of constraints. So, I mean, one example, I mean, experiment 5 in Radical Help is about how we thought about bringing communities together to kind of take care of one another. So I think it should be a continuum between how we can integrate the idea of care and connection, as John said so powerfully, into our lives, how we then think about care within the community, and then we think about professional care at one end. And rather than think about, you know, one thing that really worries me in the UK at the moment is we've got this care conversation, but we're thinking about reinventing a kind of 1950s health service as a care service, which is exactly what you're talking about. And so I think it's about undoing that. I would say that Chris Van Stone, who I mentioned, worked with me on kind of experiment number 5, and you also have, who I've seen on the call in our group, if we were in the audience, is Lynn Romeo, who is the incredible chief adult social worker in the UK, who's really thought about this from a leader of assistance perspective, and she's sitting here for I'm not sure quite how long in Sydney, so you could pick her brains. She knows so much about this. And then sort of on the confrontation, I mean, I think this is really difficult about knowing which battles to pick, Melanie, and like how to go about things. I have written a paper called Welfare 5.0 in my kind of capacity as an honorary professor at UCL, and you can find it on their website. I mean, I really believe that in the redesign that we're going to do is that we have to think about what I call a social economy. And we have to think about that anything that is to do with society, social development is going to be put into an economy with a very different sort of, I mean, ring fence, if you like, with very, very different rules. And core to that rule is that you will not be able to extract profit, that you, of course, can use kind of good business principles, but that is reinvested. And I think that and so, I mean, I have set out what I think that should be like. I think it would be really important to begin to kind of develop that. And then that answers your question about kind of companies involved in this space. I also think, by the way, for those of us who are in this work, it's really important to challenge, you know, I mean, one thing that I see, for instance, in the UK is that Guy Hands of Terra Firma, who owned all the, you know, many care homes, paid people above or below, you know, well, below minimum wage, cannot come to the UK for his board meetings because he doesn't pay tax, is now a kind of philanthropist with a big company called, you know, I can't even remember what it's called, about changing the nation. So I think also following the money and making it clear where that money is moving and how it is being kind of socially washed is also really, really important part of this. And again, it's, you know, it's not necessarily taking to the barricades, but it's definitely talking about these stories and surfacing them is really important. On bureaucrats, it's sort of, this is a kind of circle back really. So I don't know, are you saying that you're a bureaucrat and I would call you a public servant? I'm not sure, because you're not here, I don't think. But I think it is a really important question because, as I said, we need people at all levels. And in the work that I do, I work with government. If I couldn't find the you know, what you're calling bureaucrats and I would call a public servant that is sharing this mindset and can help me, it would be really, really impossible to work. But I have this thing that we all need to be the new horizontalists. You know, we need to reach out sideways to communities, to other kinds of organizations, to people that are not like us. So I guess the most important thing, and I think this also kind of circles back to Kellyanne's question about care and sort of deprofessionalizing. It's not that we don't need professionals, we need public servants, we need professionals, but we need them embedded within these new horizontal systems rather than commanding and controlling in a vertical way. Okay, Lisa, I'm going to hand back.
Thank you so much, Hilary.
Coffee.
Wonderful. Yes, take a sip. We'll get you another round and get ready. So here's a question from Thea, and I have another question from Asha, and they're kind of related. So Thea just went to put the kids to bed, so I'm going to read out the question for her. And her question is, how do we make these models seen and valued and funded? Hilary spoke about her work being shown by randomized controlled trials as being significantly more effective and yet so far from mainstream. Why? What can we do about it? And then Asha, who is still in the call, has a question about how we can put this type of work front and center in discussions we have with decision makers and funding bodies. So Asha, if you want to really briefly speak to that, then we're going to hand it back to Hilary to share what her thoughts.
Yeah, I've worked in the community sector for 30 years and have been working in these really radical ways. And I manage an organization, so now we're able to do this really radical work, which is building a relational culture, working with people who have incredible motivation to be part of change, to take decisions about, you know, what matters to them. But the biggest challenge has been to get this work funded. It does not seem to have any currency because it's not client-based. The outcomes aren't understood. In fact, they're scared by the outcomes when I have the conversations. And it doesn't matter how much it's applauded, we go back to yes, but. And I'm just a bit tired of it. And I'm getting a bit too old to have that discussion nowadays. I'm just doing it.
So what do we do with that yes, but? Hilary, over to you. Thanks, Asha.
Myself. So Asha, I mean, I think I'm quite old too, so I guess I share your pain. I mean, I think the question of what we can do is, I mean, firstly is not lose hope. I mean, the thing is, we are trying to roll back at least 50 years, maybe in some cases when we think about sort of, you know, embedded kind of structures of race, hundreds of years. So this work definitely takes time. And I think one thing, you know, that if I think about my own work over the last sort of couple of decades in the UK, is that when I started the experiments that we write about, that I write about in Radical Help, is, you know, the leaders in government who allowed us to work with them were incredibly brave. I mean, I talk about Ella and the family work. I mean, the leader of that city who said, yes, okay, I will allow the social workers to stand back. I will allow you to kind of imagine a different way. And you're not even telling me what that is because you don't even know yet. I mean, I really, really salute that bravery. Now, what's happened is that, you know, there are so many leaders. I mean, I work in a, you know, in a converted car park in Peckham in South London, like a not very kind of salubrious place, but I really like it. I'm not there now, obviously, because of lockdown, but it's impossible for me in the car park to respond to the leaders across the UK, but also across the world who now want to embrace this. So definitely there's a movement. It's not fast enough. You know, we're not there, but something that seemed really kind of perhaps known to us who worked in the communities is now much more mainstream. So I think that things are really moving. I mean, one thing that I do think is really important is to put those decision makers on your team. Like, I haven't shown any visuals this evening, but I have a, you know, usually I kind of, one of the slides I use is a diagram of different people sitting around the table. And I definitely think that asking leaders to be on the team to experience the process of making the work is very, very different than making work and then later going to lobby and say, could you look at this? I mean, this goes into a much bigger conversation about outcomes. I mentioned randomized controlled trials. I mean, I actually really don't believe in that kind of working at all, and I have huge challenges, really. I mean, when we decided that the work of Participate was complete, I wanted to share the tools and package everything in a way that everybody could use. And when I went around funders in the UK, they all said to me, but how could we possibly pay for that? We wouldn't be able to count the beneficiaries. So, you know, I too am kind of, you know, trying to think beyond this, and it is still very, very much work in progress.
Thank you so much for that, Hilary. I mean, there's so much more to talk about. Maybe you should just come back and make this an annual thing. But having said that, we have about 5, maybe just a little bit longer until we know that we've promised we would let you get to your evening. So Marc, handing over to you to see what our other panelists are thinking.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you, Hilary. I mean, as Lisa says, we're coming to our close, sadly, and it's been such an enriching evening. The chat is packed full of ideas and reflections and thoughts, you know, sort of passionate notions. I did want to give the other panelists who so generously, you know, joined us time for a closing remark or two, if they have a second. So they wanted to share 30 seconds of reflections, which I know is a terribly short period of time, but that's unfortunately what we've got. So if the panelists want to just reflect on what they've heard tonight before we break. John?
Oh, look, I just would just throw in, look, there are models out there that are getting up and running in Australia. So I would encourage you to look far and wide. Look, I was at a conference recently, and Marc Paulson, who runs an organisation, an Aboriginal organisation, his quote was, when he was talking about the acknowledgement to country, he said, for me, the way forward is to not find the right word or the right statement to make, but to find the right relationship. And there are relationships out there that we're not trying to build a better horse and cart here. You know, there are private philanthropists, trusts and foundations that are willing to, venture capitalists who have tapped out, and you should follow the money, as Hilary wisely advises. They're not trying, well, they are trying, some people are looking for redemption and they're happy to give you their money for it. And you've got to work out your comfortability with saying, are we willing to go in partnership? Because governments are coming to the table to do co-design, but we all know it's too slow. And so we need to be looking for innovative ways to be able to fund these models and fund these experiments, and to look at well-being index. So we're not just trying to get people into employment and to get them more financially well off, because we know that's the path to misery, right? Sorry. So look, find the right relationship, and by whatever means possible. It's not about your skill or your technique. I think it's far more about being open to alternative connections. So that's me.
That's amazing, John. Thank you so much. Find the right relationship. In WA, any final reflections in WA before we close for the evening?
Yeah, I'll go. Yeah, because you go first.
Okay. When this, we had a lot of juvenile crime in the town, and what we decided to do was it was our idea. We just went ahead, instead of saying, could we get support, could we get funding for this? We would have never got it off the ground. So we went ahead ourselves, and it was a success. And all of a sudden, the Lotteries Commission come in and gave us some money. Justice gave us some money. The police fully supported it. The police have got an award in Halls Creek for because the drop in crime. But what it's caused by is the Shire. So, you know, the message is, I suppose, sometimes you want something done, just go and do it.
Do you have anything to add? You good? Yeah. You sure? Okay. I look, Malcolm took the words out of my mouth. I think the case with Olabud is that they just got on the ground and started the work. We were then able to build a relationship with them to amplify that work. But it was getting straight in, getting some like runs on the board first. And I think that's also a way to get around the naysayers. So like, I think someone asked a question earlier in there of this like panel and what we were discussing. And there are some naysayers in Halls Creek, and actually not so much in Halls Creek, but in Kununurra and the neighbouring towns. There's some people who feel, you know, they want to be doing this differently or this differently. But there was an 18-month co-design where, you know, 1,000 people in the communities around Halls Creek were consulted, and they were brought on board to this, and they got elders sign off in each of those communities. And then the Shire started the work, and Dean started going out there and doing the youth engagement night officers. There was only 3 of you to begin with, and then they managed to recruit someone from each area. And as that momentum is built, and then we were able to help elevate the voice of the Shire to government and to funders at that level. And once you get that momentum going and some initial runs on the board, everybody starts to want to jump on board and build that change. So I guess don't worry about the naysayers, get in and do it. And people will jump on board when you've got that proof of what you're doing works, because it does.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that. Thank you so much. I mean, there's nothing, to my mind, there's nothing more sort of democratic than that idea that you just get on with it and do it, and it's the people themselves who are going to build the change. And that's really, you know, the ultimate message I think that we've heard this evening is that, as Hilary has said, you know, there's a paradigm shift coming. We can all see it. The world is not the same as it used to be, and we need big change. And the question is, where is that going to change? Is going to come from? How is it going to be built? And it's going to come exactly as everyone has said tonight, from the relationships we have and from the courage that we exhibit in the willingness to tackle, you know, confrontations where they arise, but also to put new practices into place on the ground. And it's just been a huge pleasure and a privilege for us here at the lab to share this space with you, to bring some folks together. We hope very much that it will continue. The lab belongs to people everywhere. It doesn't belong to the University of Sydney. My final thought before I hand back to Lisa, just to say goodbye to everyone, is, you know, thanks to the University of Sydney for being brave enough to open this space. We wish we were all together in person, because then in a way it sort of exemplifies it even stronger when you can see the space full of people from all different backgrounds, all different walks of life, all different ages, with all different commitments, coming together to build connections with each other and create a society which works for the common good. And we at the lab are hugely grateful for the university for backing us in that work, and especially to the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Duncan Iverson, whose vision it was to create the lab in the first place. So thanks to Duncan and to everyone who helps us in our work. Thanks to everyone who's come tonight. Thank you, of course, to Hilary for getting up so crazily early. And thanks to the fabulous, brilliant Lisa Fennis for holding this event, this incredibly complex event, all together so fabulously. Back to you, Lisa, to close us out.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marc. And I just really want to also thank John, Owen, and Malcolm and Sophie and Dean. Thanks so much for joining us from your incredibly busy weeks. I'm just waving a little bit. The team here in the lab is all busy behind their computers. Thanks, team. everybody's here. And then lastly, I know in the chat you have seen that we are doing a strategic partnership project with the Paul Ramsey Foundation, which is in strengthening civil society. A lot of the things that we've discussed today are really crucial to that. So feel free to reach out to us about it. We'd love to chat to you. And then now, we are definitely 3 minutes over time. It is 7:33, and I'm sure you've got families or dogs or, you know, lives to go back to. So feel free to take yourself off mute, wave, say goodbye to each other, pretend like we're in a room together, and then we're just going to close this call and hope to see you very soon online or in real life. Thank you for joining, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.